It was January 17th, 1871. The skies over France were heavy with grief. The Franco-Prussian War had ravaged the countryside for months. Cities burned. Sons never returned. Mothers knelt in doorways with hands trembling in prayer. And in the small, snow-covered village of Pontmain, the silence was not peace, it was fear. Only 500 souls lived there, nestled between hills and frozen fields. Their men had already been sent to fight, and the Prussian army was closing in. They had heard it rumors carried on the wind like curses, the invaders are just hours away. But on that evening, something changed. Not from the east, where armies marched, nor from the west, where Paris cried, but from above, in the sky, above a humble barn in the center of town. And the first to see it was a boy. His name was Eugene Barbadette, 11 years old, the kind of boy who still ran barefoot through hay in summer and fell asleep dreaming of saints in shining armor. He and his younger brother Joseph, just 8, were helping their father in the barn. But when Eugene stepped outside into the cold night air, he stopped mid-breath. Above him, just above the rooftop, hovered a vision so radiant, so silent, he could not speak. A woman, tall, beautiful, clothed in a deep blue robe covered in golden stars. Her hands were raised not in warning, but in welcome. And her face, oh, her face was peace itself. Smiling, gentle, glowing. No one else saw her at first, until Joseph joined him outside and gasped. "I see her too," he whispered. Their father saw nothing. Neighbors passing by saw nothing. But the boys stood transfixed. Word spread quickly. The Barbadette boys are seeing something in the sky. Soon a crowd had gathered in the icy street, breath visible in the air, lanterns glowing softly. But only children could see her. Francois Richer, aged 11. Jean-Marie Labos, just 9. They came and they saw her, exactly as the boys had said. More children arrived, and the crowd, now dozens thick, stood in awe, watching their children gaze upward into the night, their eyes shining with something otherworldly. The villagers didn't laugh. They didn't question. Not in that hour, not with the shadow of war crawling ever closer. Instead, they began to pray. First the rosary, then hymns, and something happened. As they prayed, the lady in the sky changed. A black veil appeared beneath her feet, and slowly a banner unfurled above her head. Words began to form on it, letters of light, etched across the night.
"But pray, my children. God will hear you in a short time. My son lets himself be moved."
The children read aloud what they saw, and the crowd began to weep. Old women clutched their rosaries. Young fathers knelt in the snow. Children smiled and sang with eyes fixed on heaven. And the woman smiled too. Not once did she speak, but her silence was filled with meaning like music too sacred for words. She watched them as they prayed, as they hoped, as they dared believe that heaven had not forgotten them. That same night, unknown to the villagers, the Prussian general leading troops toward Pontmain received sudden, confusing orders. He halted the advance, then retreated. No reason was ever given. No resistance stood in their path. The invasion simply stopped. Pontmain was spared. And the next morning, when the village awoke to a quiet sky, they knew what had happened. They had seen her. They had been heard. And in a time of war, death, and fear, they had met the Queen of Heaven, not in a palace, not in a cathedral, but above a barn, in the stillness of a January night. The next morning, the frost still clung to the windows of Pontmain's cottages, but something had changed. The air was different, softer, quieter, as if the village had exhaled a breath it didn't know it was holding. Word spread quickly that the Prussian army had inexplicably stopped its march and turned back. Families emerged from their homes in disbelief. Just hours before, they had been preparing to flee or hide, convinced their peaceful hamlet would soon be swallowed by the chaos of war. Instead, they found themselves standing in snow-covered silence, saved not by swords or strategy, but by prayer, by children, and by a silent lady in the sky. Eugene Barbadette and the other children were questioned with care, but they remained steady in every detail of their vision. The blue robe with golden stars, the red crucifix on her chest, the black veil that appeared under her feet during the prayer, the silent smile, radiant yet tender. Most astonishing to the adults was the message she had delivered, words written in light, slowly appearing like gentle fire across the sky. The children repeated them again and again. "But pray, my children. God will hear you in a short time. My son lets himself be moved." In the days that followed, Pontmain was filled with a quiet wonder. People walked to Mass with new reverence. They spoke in hushed tones, not from fear, but from awe. Parents who hadn't prayed in years returned to their rosaries. The old and infirm came to the Barbadette barn simply to stand near the place where heaven had opened. Children knelt in the snow long after their feet had gone numb, hoping to catch another glimpse of her, this lady who had smiled but said nothing, who had said nothing yet moved a war to retreat. News of the apparition spread, first through nearby towns and eventually reaching the ears of church authorities. While France still reeled from the aftermath of war, bishops and priests traveled to Pontmain to interview the children. Their testimonies, consistent and deeply sincere, began to stir something in the hearts of even the most skeptical. Unlike other apparitions filled with visions of punishment or dramatic prophecy, Pontmain's miracle was marked by an overwhelming gentleness. It was quiet, calm, almost hidden like the whisper of God in a storm. What also made it difficult to ignore was the historical fact. The Prussian troops had indeed halted and retreated without clear explanation, just as the vision had promised. The general, later questioned, reportedly said that something invisible blocked our way. Though he would never admit more, the soldiers themselves told stories of feeling a strange, immovable resistance, something unseen, yet undeniably present. As the church conducted its investigation, the children remained unchanged. They were not seeking fame. They returned to their chores and schoolwork, speaking of the apparition only when asked. Eugene later became a priest. Joseph would live a quiet, prayerful life. Their innocence had not been corrupted by attention. They had seen the Mother of God, and that was enough. In 1872, just 1 year later, Bishop Wickart of Laval officially approved the apparition. A sanctuary was built on the site of the vision, and Pontmain, once an obscure farming village, became a place of pilgrimage. Yet, even as pilgrims arrived, the essence of the miracle remained as it had begun: humble, silent, and pure. There were no theatrical pronouncements, no apocalyptic warnings, just a message of trust, spoken to the hearts of children during one of the darkest hours in their nation's history. What sets Pontmain apart is not only the miracle itself, but the way in which it unfolded. It was not a public spectacle, but a divine visitation wrapped in quiet. It came not to kings or bishops, but to farm children in a frozen field. It did not demand, it invited. It did not accuse, it encouraged. And perhaps that is what the world needed most in that moment, not fear or fire, but a mother's calm reassurance. For those who visit Pontmain today, the message remains the same. In the shadow of suffering, in the looming presence of war or despair, heaven is never far. It waits patiently for hearts willing to pray, for souls humble enough to believe. And when the time is right, it speaks not always in thunder, but sometimes in snow and silence, through the trusting eyes of a child. Time has a way of smoothing out the edges of history. The snow that fell in Pontmain on that January night has long since melted. The children who looked up into the stars have returned to the earth. The war that once cast its shadow over France has faded into the pages of books and remembrance. And yet, something of that night remains, something that cannot be erased by time or buried by centuries. For in Pontmain, heaven once touched the earth, and the echo of that touch still lingers. After the Church officially approved the apparition in 1872, the village slowly transformed. The barn where the Virgin appeared became a sacred place. Pilgrims arrived first in pairs, then in dozens, then by the hundreds. They came not for spectacle, but for peace. There were no great signs in the sky, no promised secrets or punishments, only the gentle reassurance of a mother who once said, "Pray, my children, God will hear you." And that was enough. A great basilica was eventually built in her honor. Its twin spires now rise over the modest rooftops of the village like hands in prayer, visible from miles away across the Normandy countryside. Inside, the stained glass windows glow with scenes of that holy night. The children standing in the snow, the Virgin wrapped in stars, the message in radiant script. And as light filters through the colored glass, it falls quietly on kneeling pilgrims below, just as her presence once fell silently from the sky. And yet, despite the grandeur of the basilica, Pontmain has never lost its soul. The village remains small, simple, unspoiled, the kind of place where the sacred still feels possible. Even today, visitors say they sense it's something in the air, a stillness that calms the mind, a gentleness that enters the heart. It is not something that can be photographed or touched, but it's there, as surely as snow once blanketed the streets and children once gazed upward in wonder. The legacy of Pontmain is not one of thunder or spectacle. It is not like Fatima or Lourdes with their sweeping global attention and complex prophecies. It is quieter, more intimate, and perhaps for that very reason, more accessible to us. Because the heart of the story is something each of us can grasp. A moment of fear turned into a moment of faith. A village saved by prayer. A mother who came, not to rebuke, but to comfort. In today's world, no less troubled than 1871, the message of Pontmain still speaks. It speaks to those exhausted by conflict, who wonder if peace is even possible. It speaks to those praying for loved ones far away, not knowing if their prayers are heard. And most of all, it speaks to those who feel small and forgotten. For if a village like Pontmain, tucked away in the frozen folds of France, could be visited by heaven, why not any village? Why not any heart? What makes the apparition so powerful is not just that it happened, but how it happened. In the middle of nowhere, to children, with no voice, only a smile. No fire, only stars. She did not tell them to fear. She told them to pray. And when they did, heaven moved. There's something beautiful about that kind of miracle. It reminds us that God often works, not in loud declarations, but in the quiet agreement of hearts willing to hope. That Mary, the mother of Jesus, still walks among her children, not always seen, not always heard, but always near, especially when the night is darkest. And so, the story of Pontmain is not over. It lives on in every whispered Hail Mary, in every candle lit with trembling hands, in every winter night when someone, somewhere, looks up into the sky and asks, "Are you still with us?" The answer, given that night in 1871, still glows across the years. But pray, my children, God will hear you in a short time. My son lets himself be moved. And if you listen closely in silence, in faith, you might hear it too. Not with your ears, but with your soul. There is something sacred about snow. It hushes the world, softens every edge, covers even the deepest wounds with a blanket of quiet. That night in Pontmain, the snow did more than fall, it listened. And in the stillness, something eternal was spoken, not in thunder or flame, but in the silent gaze of a mother who came not to astonish, but to console. This was not a grand apparition set before kings or crowds. It was not paired with thunderclaps or divine proclamations. It was quiet, gentle, almost hidden, but that's what made it beautiful, and that's why it mattered. It happened in a forgotten village, to children, in the middle of war. And instead of calling for attention, Mary came with only a smile and a sentence written in light. But pray, my children. God will hear you in a short time. My son lets himself be moved. That alone, those simple words became a lifeline. And they were not just comfort. They were a promise. The people of Pontmain were spared, not by strategy or strength, but by prayer and trust. And the Church, in its wisdom, listened carefully to the testimony of those children, to the transformation of that village, and to the miracle that followed. Just 1 year later, in 1872, the apparition of Our Lady of Pontmain was officially approved by the Catholic Church. It was declared worthy of belief, and her message, though brief, was understood to be deeply aligned with the heart of the Gospel: mercy, hope, and the loving intercession of a mother. Since then, thousands have come to that quiet village in Normandy, not to be dazzled, but to be restored. The basilica built in her honor now stands tall, but the soul of Pontmain has remained untouched by grandeur. It is still a place of simplicity, of prayer, of snow falling softly on stone. It is still the kind of place where you can almost hear her if you're listening. And maybe that's the heart of this story. That even now, in a time filled with noise and confusion, in a world spinning faster and faster, the miracle of Pontmain is not locked in the past. It lives on in every whispered rosary, every anxious prayer offered in silence, every soul who lifts their eyes and dares to hope. Because what Mary did that night was more than appear. She showed us that God still listens, that heaven still leans close to earth, and that even when our world feels dark and uncertain, light still breaks through, but not always with spectacle. Sometimes it comes through children's eyes, through hymns sung in trembling voices, through snow falling gently on the roof of a barn. Sometimes it comes when we least expect it, when we are afraid, when we feel forgotten, when all we can do is pray. That is when she comes. Pontmain is a reminder that we are never truly alone, that prayer is not wasted breath, that Mary still walks among us, especially in our moments of fear, especially when the night seems endless. And when she comes, she doesn't always say much, but she doesn't have to. Her presence alone changes everything. So when the world feels heavy, when war seems to march again, when the silence feels unbearable, remember Pontmain. Remember the smile of a mother, the prayers of children, and the snow-covered village that heaven did not forget. Look up, pray, and know this: God still hears you, and his mother is never far.